Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today, let's get into it. Let's talk about how to start a recycling program. So if you caught my last video, you know I'm very excited about recycling. I love talking about it, and that's ultimately how I got started on my zero waste journey, was recycling. We'll do just a little bit of a backstory about why I got so passionate about this, but if you want my full environmental story, it will be linked above. But basically, I lived in a small town my whole life, trash and recycling out on the curb, out of sight, out of mind, never see it again. And because there was not very many people in my town, I never really saw how much that waste added up. And so it wasn't until I moved to Texas in 2017 that I really saw how much waste we created as humans. Especially because there's no recycling in Texas. Almost the whole state, from my perspective. I get there, I'm eating in the dining facility, and there's plastic bottles, there's metal cans, there's glass, all in the trash, and all perfectly good materials. And I'm like, why? Why are these good materials ending up in the trash? And it goes back to a lot of recycling issues that I talked about in the last video about how recycling is not very valuable, and ultimately just Texas doesn't want to incentivize recycling. So that brings us to the very first recycling program that I started. I was in Texas and I'm like, this is not okay. We need to do something about this. So I asked one of my teachers, like, hey, is there recycling here? Are there recycling facilities? Can we start recycling? And they didn't have much information, but they pretty much said, like, yeah, if you want to start something, go for it. So I did. Step one, if you don't have, say you don't have recycling in your school, in your office, step one is to find a recycling facility. In Texas, it was pretty hard, but I did find 2 recycling facilities in the city I was living in. I was living in San Angelo. The first one shut down after a while, but thankfully the second one stayed open. Regardless, I got in contact with them. I'm like, hey, do you have any bins I can use to take to my dorms so I can collect recycling? And they did. So that made it very easy for me. They had bins that I could use. It was free. I just had to go pick them up. This is where the hard work comes in. So this is definitely not for someone lazy, like, no offense, or someone who just doesn't want to put in a lot of work. I feel like if you're watching this video, you're probably pretty passionate about recycling and willing to do just about anything, like I was. I get the bins. I put them up. I put them like in the laundry rooms, in communal areas where people were a lot, and then I made signs. It was just simple, like, I can accept plastic, metal, and glass. Please don't put any trash in here. Make sure it's clean, and make sure labels are taken off, and so forth. The standard recycling rules. Granted, almost nobody followed them, but it did help in a lot of cases. Step 2, collect the bins, get the signs. Step 3 is to just start collecting recycling. So basically I just started like a schedule. Every Saturday, I would spend my free time on the weekends collecting recycling. Such a nerd, I know. And maybe Saturday morning-ish, I would just go take labels off of any bottles that were remaining, rinse out anything that still needed to be rinsed out, collect them all into bags, and then drive to the recycling center. Like I said, it does require a bit of work. In Texas, it definitely requires a personal vehicle. Texas is not public transportation friendly at all. But I would just load up my car, take it to the recycling center, and then from the recycling center, they were definitely more hands-on instead of like hands-off as an individual, so I had to sort it myself. So once I learned that, when I was going through the recycling at my dorm, I would bag stuff into separate bags, so then I could just dump it once I got to the facility. But the first 2 times at the recycling facility, I would have to put plastic in the plastic bins and metal in the metal bins. But you know, once you get that routine, it becomes really, really easy. And that was pretty much it for my recycling program in Texas. Once I got into that routine, it became a pretty easy task. Like, it would only take an hour out of my week to do all this. And then I became known around my dorm as like the recycle girl. I don't think anybody knew my name. But ultimately, I had to find the numbers. I saved hundreds of pounds of waste from going to the landfill. And that's what, like, in the moment, it seems tedious. It's hard work at times. It's boring. But like, looking back, I saved so much waste from going to the landfill. And then I set that program up for success. I picked someone to lead the program after I left. It's been 4 years, so I don't know if it's still going. That would be really cool if it was. That was it for the first one. Now, the second program I started here in Las Vegas is a little bit different. Fortunately and unfortunately, I lived in Japan. Fortunately, I loved it. Unfortunately, they have recycling down to a science. They are very good at recycling over there. So when I moved to Las Vegas, I was very sad about the recycling situation. I get to my work, my new workplace, very first question I ask, is there recycling? Where can I recycle? And everyone's like, yeah, we don't do that here. I'm like, excuse me, what? Be right back. So within a week or so, I had some bins. Here was a little bit different. So I work on a military base. I tried to contact the base recycling for a while and nobody got back to me, ever. Nobody ever answered my calls. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just take matters into my own hands. It did take a little bit of my own money to buy the bins, but I got like 5 bins for $20, so it was really cheap. If you don't have access, like if you're doing this on a budget, you can just use cardboard boxes. You can find like a big Amazon box, just put a trash bag around it so that the cardboard doesn't get wet and ruined, and then you have a makeshift box, which would work really well. And it's upcycling. But ultimately, it started in the same way. I found some bins, I made some signs, I put the bins out, we're good to go, we're in business. Here, I work with a lot less people than I was working with in Texas, so it was easier to control and easier to spread the word about the rules. In Texas, it was also a bunch of 18-year-olds. Everyone's a little less responsible. It was harder to manage. But I'd say most people here know the rules. If they don't, I just do it anyway. And I have no problem with it because I know in the end I'm keeping a lot of waste out of the landfill. And the next step is pretty much the same too. Every Friday before I go home, I collect the recycling into a bag, and then since the base doesn't recycle, I take it home with me and put it in my personal bin. And it ends up only being 1 or 2 trash bags a week, not that much, so it's not like I need to actually take it to a facility. It's easy enough to just put it in my recycling at home. And then also here in Las Vegas, we don't sort our recycling. So I just put it all into my bin and send it off and hope that all my work was not in vain and that it doesn't go to the landfill anyway. So personally, I think it's a little bit easier here, but both recycling projects that I set up were very similar. You get bins, you make some rules, you spread awareness like, hey, we have recycling bins now, here are the rules. You collect it, and then you take it to a recycling facility. And then it's to the point, of course, that, like I said, I'm a little bit obsessed with recycling. I will, every time I get up to go to the bathroom, I monitor the trash, and I will pick recycling out of the trash and put it into the bins. If I see dirty recycling in the recycling bin, I'll take it to the bathroom with me, give it a quick rinse, just because I know that recycling correctly is very important. If we put dirty recycling in there, it risks the entire batch being sent to landfill. And I created this program so we don't send stuff to the landfill. But ultimately, that's it. Starting a recycling program is pretty simple, especially if you have access to free resources like bins. But like I said, you can make your own bins. And the other big hindrance I'm seeing, maybe it's just because I live out west where we're very dependent on cars, but you do need a personal car in order to help transport everything. But if you don't personally have a car, you can ask a friend, like, hey, friend, once a week, can you help me drive some recycling to the recycling center? And if you have a good friend, then chances are they'll help you out. But the other thing you can do is contact the facility themselves. Be like, hey, I don't have a car. Would it be possible for you to come on like 8 o'clock every Friday to come pick up the recycling? And it's possible that they'll help you do that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much how I started 2 recycling programs. Very similar, but also a little different. If you have any questions on starting a recycling program for yourself, leave your questions down below. I can address it in a future video or just address it down below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. And if you've started a recycling program of your own, leave your tips for starting them down below too, so that we can get more and more recycling programs started and keep more waste out of the landfill. But that's all that I have for today. If you're new here and you made it all the way this far, I really appreciate your time. But I would really appreciate it too if you hit the subscribe button down there, because I talk about all sorts of things, zero waste, focusing on free, easy, and fun ways to live low waste, but also ways to be a practical activist, and that's kind of what this category falls into. It's very simple to start a recycling program, and it is a very big step of activism, I think, and especially if you're not so much into going to rallies and stuff. Speaking of which, a video on that is coming out soon, how to be a practical activist from home in COVID times, as well as a lot of us are introverts. So that is all that I have for today. I really appreciate your time. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and until next time, remember that your small actions have a big impact in the long run. Bye guys. Oh, I meant to like sit back farther so I could format this into a TikTok.